Greg Davis here with Priority Talk Radio. Good news, Christian values. Glad you're listening to us here at Truth 101 WXJC, or maybe later on at our podcast pages. Thank you for being with us. And we are really excited, as we've promised, and as you've clicked to listen, to hear Rear Admiral Kent Davis with us, former commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. And we say former because that's a big part of our discussion today.
You probably will be.
So, Admiral, welcome into the show today. Good to have you with us, sir.
Thanks, Greg. It's so great to be with you. And even though we have the same last name,
we're
not related, but with that last name, I must say you must be a brilliant man.
You got too much hair to be related to me. No, we actually, we just met a couple of weeks ago.
We did.
And have kind of hit it off and been texting a little bit back and forth. And have gotten together today to have a conversation. So I got a lot of questions, and I think listeners will be interested to hear your story because they've seen you in the news quite a bit here lately.
Oh, yeah.
We'll get more to it, but just to say, you were fired by Governor Ivey recently.
That's a fair characterization.
And we want to tell that story of how this has went down, what has happened. But I think it's important to back up and sort of let people get to know you, where you come from. I think they'll be able to understand your side of things, your angle of things better.
Sure.
As they get to know you more. So just give everybody kind of the thumbnail of Kent Davis, and personally, and then your career-wise as well.
Yeah, Greg, I'd love to. So I was born in Montgomery, Alabama, at St. Margaret's Hospital. My parents were from Alabama. My dad grew up in Birmingham, went to Woodlawn High School. My mom was from a little town of about 500 people in southwest Alabama called Milry, Alabama.
Milry, yeah.
Yep, down in Washington County. And both of them went to college. My mom went to Montevallo when it was all women, and my dad went to Auburn. It wasn't even Auburn at the time. It was API, Alabama Polytechnic Institute. And in 1942, my dad was a student at Auburn, and the war broke out and he got drafted. He ended up getting wounded. He was in the infantry. He was a private first class, and he got wounded in the Battle of the Bulge. Got hit by a German machine gun.
Wow.
Spent 9 months in a Army hospital recuperating, and they discharged him. And so I grew up with a little bit, that greatest generation didn't like to talk about their war experiences a lot, but I knew my dad had served honorably and had been wounded. And I always had a fascination, and I wanted to give back a little bit. So after I graduated from college, my dad encouraged me, well, get your degree. If you're interested in the military, join the military if you're interested. And I did. And I had the strangest career path. I joined the Navy first, and I was stationed in Long Beach, California, and I ended up marrying my minister's daughter in Long Beach, California. My father-in-law was a career Methodist minister.
Okay.
He's still alive. He's 90 years old,
Wow.
retired from the ministry. And my wife, after we got married, said, I'm kind of fascinated with this military stuff. She ended up joining. She joined the Navy Reserve and did 21 years and retired as a Navy lieutenant commander. I ended up a guy that said, I'll do 4 years and then get out. I ended up doing almost 31 years in uniform. But along the way, I got out once and went to law school in the GI Bill, and I rejoined the Army. And I was in the Army for one tour, and after a tour with the Army, I got out again, and 9/11 happened, and I rejoined the Navy Reserve. Had no idea I'd be spending so much time on active duty, but after 9/11, both my wife and I spent a lot of time on active duty and went to places like, spent 7 months in Afghanistan and did a deployment to Qatar and other places around the globe. So I spent a lot of time on active duty. Finally retired in 2016 after almost 31 years of Army and Navy service.
Wow, that's quite a career, 31 years, and we're even out some. So
in civilian life, I was an attorney, both in private practice with a big law firm in Atlanta, and then I worked for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security after 9/11 happened.
Now, tell us how, after you retired, how long until you become commissioner?
Yeah, so after...
And so you're brought on as commissioner by the board of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, right? They choose the commissioner?
I had a short hiatus, so I retired in 2016. For a while, I was in city government in Anniston, Alabama, and ended up as the city manager in Anniston, Alabama. I had worked there as a civilian with the Department of Homeland Security. And then, strangely, I got a job offer at Maxwell Air Force Base. You know, I'd been in the Army and Navy, but apparently that wasn't enough, so I had to go work for the Air Force
Wow.
too. And I worked for the Air Force at Maxwell, loved it for a couple of years, worked for the 3-star general there at Maxwell. And then it was in early 2019, the vacancy came open for the commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. And a lot of people contacted me and said, wow, you need to apply for that, including a lot of elected officials reached out to me. So sent my resume in. I think they had about 60 applicants and went through several interviews, including public interviews, and was finally selected and started in February of 2019 as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs.
And I want to go back and just confirm, it is the board, or is that what they call it, of the affairs?
Yeah, that's
that does
right.
the hiring?
That's right. So
the governor doesn't appoint that position.
Correct. Yeah. So under state law, the Code of Alabama, the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs was established in 1945 at the end of World War II and was kind of organized like a private company, which is a good thing, I think, including a board of directors that oversees the department, the State Board of Veterans Affairs. And by law, there are 17 slots that sit on that board. And they represent the large veteran service organizations in the state, which gives that department direct accountability to the veterans of Alabama. There are almost 400,000 veterans in Alabama. You add in their family members and active duty military, you're talking about a quarter of the state, 25% almost, that department considers its clients to take care of with services and benefits and assistance. So yeah, that State Board of Veterans Affairs. Now, an important distinction. The governor, by law, is the chair of that board. In practical terms, the governor rarely participates in board proceedings. And the way it works is the veteran service organizations nominate a list of 3 names for each slot, and then the governor gets to pick. So there is some political oversight as well.
Sure.
But it's always been a great mixture of those veteran service organizations in an apolitical, nonpartisan fashion appointing those positions or nominating those positions, and the governor making the final choice of who sits on that board. And also by law, the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs is supposed to be appointed on a nonpartisan, apolitical basis. And if you look at the history, the intention was that the commissioner is not supposed to be political because taking care of veterans is not supposed to be a political issue. It's kind of like supposedly running the military is supposed to be an apolitical decision-making process.
Yeah. Tell people about some of the work of the Alabama Veterans Affairs, and even more specifically, some of the good things you guys were able to accomplish. And I guess roughly 5 years that you were there?
About 5.5 years, almost 6 years I was there. So
what do you do and not do?
Yeah, I need to distinguish. People get confused all the time, including veterans, which surprises me. What's the difference between the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and the state departments, including the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs?
Good question.
That's a good starting point.
Yeah.
So the federal government does 3 basic things. They have 3 separate administrations in the VA.
Okay.
They have the Veterans Health Administration, and people are very familiar with those because they run the medical centers and the clinics that provide short-term medical care for veterans. I mean, here in Birmingham, there's the Birmingham VA Medical Center, run by a great gentleman, Dr. Kokoy. I know all of the federal officials. So largely focused on short-term medical needs of veterans. And then there's the Veterans Benefits Administration, which handles things like the GI Bill, the home loan program for veterans, disability compensation, and things like that. And in their third mission, and all of these partner with the states, the third mission is running a system of national cemeteries through the National Cemetery Administration, including there are 2 federal cemeteries here in Alabama, one in Montevallo, not too far down the road, beautiful facility, great folks
from
that work
American
there.
Village, close by.
So the states kind of pick up where the federal government leaves off. There's no overlap. There's no competition. It really is a very strong partnership. I would say, if not the strongest, one of the strongest federal-state partnerships, and usually very harmonious. So the states provide a range of benefits. It's up to that individual state through their Department of Veterans Affairs. Here in Alabama, the major functions are The Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs runs a series of veteran service offices around the state to assist veterans free of charge with just about any of their needs, whether it's applying for federal benefits like GI Bill or a home loan program or things like that, disability compensation, or the state benefits. And they also act as a referral service to the many great other agencies and private sector organizations and faith-based organizations that provide services to veterans.
For mental health, things like that.
Exactly. So free of charge. There are currently 62 of those veteran service offices around the state. Ironically, we used to have an office in all 67 counties. About 15 to 20 years ago, the state actually cut those back and closed 17 of those offices, which left whole areas of the state without those services for veterans. In the last 5 years, we've added 12 new offices. We did it without a budget increase through some efficiencies in opening part-time offices and putting people on the road to open those offices 1 or 2 days a week.
So during your time, open 12?
That's correct.
More, great.
We recognized there was a gap, especially in the more rural, poor areas of the state. There was just a lack of those services. And sometimes those are the areas of the states that were in most need of those services.
Need the help the most.
Right. So we were on the path to getting back in every single county. We were getting pretty close to that. So that's one of the services the state, and just about I think every state provides that service through veteran service offices. The second service provided in Alabama, and most states do this, is long-term care of veterans through state veterans homes. And now in Alabama, the state operates 5 state veterans homes. They're spread all over the state, all the way from Huntsville in the north down to Bay Minette in the south near Mobile. When I became commissioner, we had the longest waiting list in the country to get into our state veterans homes. We clearly needed more beds, more facilities. So we embarked, about the time I became commissioner, on a long-term project to build a new state veterans home. We did a feasibility study, went through a long process of picking a location, and just in September, the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs opened a brand new state-of-the-art state veterans home, the Command Sergeant Major Benny G. Atkins home in Enterprise, Alabama, right near the former Fort Rucker, now known as Fort Novosel. So that was a big addition. $100 million project.
Wow.
Used a mixture. We had to line up federal grant money, state funding. The local government enterprise in Coffee County chipped in assets and were wonderful partners in this. So that was a major project. So that long-term care of veterans through the state veterans home is another service that's offered. Other services offered by the state include, so the federal government has the GI Bill, which is a scholarship program for veterans. Many states offer supplemental scholarship programs, either for veterans or for their dependents. Alabama, since the end of World War II, has offered a scholarship program for dependents of disabled veterans.
Okay.
And the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs administers that program. It's no small program. There are approximately 15 to 16,000 students enrolled in any given time in that scholarship program.
Big operation.
And I will tell you, a lot of kids and spouses have been able to go to college, community college, or technical schools because of that scholarship. It's been a boost to the intellectual capital of the state of Alabama and really retained a lot of talent in this state. The final mission, major mission that the State Department in Alabama provides is cemetery services also. Burial of veterans and cemetery services is a pure partnership between the federal government and the states. The long-term vision is to have a veteran cemetery within 75 miles of every single veteran in the United States. And we're pretty close to meeting that goal. We're about 95% towards meeting that goal. The shared vision is also that it's supposed to be about 50-50. About 50% of the veteran cemetery should be federally owned and about 50% state-owned. Right now in Alabama, we have 2 federal cemeteries that are active and 1 state cemetery down in Spanish Fort, Alabama. We had plans when I was commissioner to build a second state cemetery up in North Alabama somewhere because there's clearly a geographic hole there that we're not meeting the needs of veterans. So those are the major services that
I'm
are
learning
provided
a
by the
lot
state.
because I had no idea.
Big
all this
organization.
encompassed. Yeah.
When you add up all of the civil service and contract employees in the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, you're talking about 1,200 approximately employees in about 70 different facilities around the state. So big operation.
Well, 5.5 years you're serving as commissioner of the Department of Veterans Affairs here in Alabama. Things are rocking along, going just fine. Good reviews, good progress, no issues. But that came to a quick change, didn't it?
It sure did. On
Let's
September
take a
5th.
break. September. Let's take a break, come back on the other side, and we'll start to get into what some of the news and what some of the headlines are that you've been reading about this situation with Rear Admiral Kent Davis, former commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, as our guest. Stay tuned. And we return. Thank you for being with us. It's Priority Talk Radio here at Truth 101 WXJC. If you're listening, thank you. And if you're listening later, thank you. You could also be viewing this over our online video outlets as well. So there is video of this conversation today if you want to go back and see that as well. We are visiting with Rear Admiral Kent Davis, former commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, and many other things as well. Your resume, the segment would be over if we rehashed all of that. My goodness. And so things are going well at the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. Going along great with the board. Job reviews, everything's good.
Absolutely.
And then September 5th, is that right?
Correct.
Of this year, you get an email.
Things changed pretty quickly. So yeah, I was had been appointed apparently unanimously to my second term by the State Board of Veterans Affairs. So I was intending to stay for a full 8 years and finish out a term. We were getting accolades from all over the country, nothing but good reports about the improvements we had made and progress going on and how we were assisting veterans. There was an underlying issue, and it's a pretty serious issue in Alabama. Now, it's a nationwide issue, and it has to do with veterans' mental health. You know, those invisible wounds of war,
Yeah.
especially from Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Desert Storm, have caught up with a lot of veterans. And unfortunately, it really affects Alabama. Alabama has traditionally either the worst or second worst veteran per capita suicide rate in the country. We have very high rates of opioid addictions and other mental health issues. There's no way to sugarcoat that. It's a real problem in the state of Alabama.
Well, I would say, look, that when you're talking about suicide and things like that, this is probably the thing that probably keeps you awake at night, thinking about how do we help people over all the other things.
It does.
Because it's life or death in many situations, and certainly quality of life if people are suffering PTSD.
I get a little emotional when I talk about this. One thing I'm proud about Alabama has a reverence for life. Mm-hmm. That is a good thing, but I remind people, my gosh, those who have served their country and all the liberties that we enjoy were born on the backs of those veterans. We have a real problem with veterans taking their own lives.
Yeah.
We all need to work on that. So for 5 years, I was trying to raise the bar on that issue repeatedly. And I got to tell you, I'm sure I ruffled some feathers by repeatedly raising that issue and even saying at times, we're not doing enough in Alabama to help with that, because it's supposed to be a shared responsibility between the federal VA and the state to assist veterans. The federal VA can't keep up with the issue. They can't hire enough mental health professionals. There is a federal law called the Mission Act, which allows the federal VA to refer veterans out for private care. The problem is Alabama traditionally also ranks very low in the availability of mental health services. And many people point to the fact that when it comes to veterans' mental health, it's even worse. There are very few tailored services for veterans to deal with things like PTSD and traumatic brain injury and transition issues that disproportionately affects the veteran community. So for years, we were trying to raise the bar on that. We formed something called Alabama's Challenge to prevent veteran suicides. We had partnerships with dozens of organizations. Well, we thought literally we had a godsend about 2 years ago. In the post-COVID era, there was all sorts of federal grant money available. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars flowing out. The State Board of Veterans Affairs had very politely but very firmly said, can you please set aside some of the grant money for veterans, especially for veterans' suicide prevention and other mental health issues.
And that's a call from the governor's office, how to put that money aside? Where it's
Usually through the
spent,
legislature.
Or had to come through the legislature. Okay.
Legislature. And we've had some great supporters in the legislature. And I've gotten in the habit of only pointing out the good folks that have helped. And it was bipartisan, I got to say. Folks like Neil Rafferty, a former Marine representative from Birmingham happens to be a Democrat. Kenneth Paschal, Republican, great guy,
Veteran.
Also a veteran, Army veteran, first sergeant. Along the way have helped us and others. Senator Greg Albritton, also a veteran. It's probably not a coincidence. Mainly the veterans would usually step forward and say, yeah, we do need to help veterans. So about 2 years ago, we were told that the legislature and the finance department was going to arrange to set aside upwards of $7 million for veterans' mental health, especially veteran suicide programs. Our vision all along was what we need to empower are the nonprofits, faith-based organizations, and institutions of higher education that are already in this business and are helping veterans and saving lives. No kidding. They have great programs. The success rates are great. They just don't have the assets to reach the audience that they need to out there. So there was a little confusion because in the beginning the money was, I think, erroneously earmarked for use in the state veterans' homes. And we spent months telling finance department, legislature,
that's not the same thing.
That's not the same thing. The state veterans homes don't reach the general veteran population. They're long-term care, nursing facilities. We have social workers in there. We've already gotten COVID relief money. Wouldn't be ethical for us to take $7 million and spend it in the state veterans homes. But you think that was just a mistake? It was a mistake. Innocent mistake. Complete innocent mistake. But we spent months negotiating, trying to fix it. Well, eventually it worked out. And we were told we could use the money in 2023 for a generic grant program for nonprofits and institutions of higher education. So we did a request for proposals, asking those nonprofits and institutions of higher education submit proposals, how you could use this money. Not talking a huge amount. In the end, the highest amount that any organization got was $250,000. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot in the grant world, but for a small nonprofit, that can save a lot of lives. So another issue is the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs does not have a grant distribution office. So everybody agreed. The governor's office, finance department, the legislature agreed we would partner with the Alabama Department of Mental Health in distributing the funds, and we would use their grant office, and we would pay them for that service. We were going to pay them $80,000, a lot of money, to administer the distribution of the grant funds, and more importantly, to draft contracts with those individual grant recipients that would stipulate, here's what you can spend the money on and what you can't. The process was going on. We signed a formal memorandum of agreement, and we thought everything was going fine. Now, unfortunately, well, two things happened. First of all, I said there might be an issue because we work with these organizations every day. I do not want to even have the appearance of undue influence in this process or favoritism. So I formally recused myself. I didn't look at the grant proposals. What we did is
and you had some medical issues at the time as well, right?
I'm not looking for sympathy at all, but right about this time this grant program started at the end of 2022, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. So I was in and out of the hospital with surgeries. I went through about 7 months of intensive chemotherapy. So I was not at my best. You weren't
involved with the grant process. Who was getting them? Who was?
No,
you were out of it. Okay.
Intentionally.
Yeah.
Even if I had been well and had been able physically to do it, I recused myself, and it was for a direct reason to avoid any conflict, even the appearance of a conflict of interest, because we work with these organizations all the time. They come to our veterans fairs, and we refer people to them and all that. So the scheme that was put together was there was a 5-person independent panel put together. 3 of those were nominated by the Alabama Department of Mental Health and were employees of the Alabama Department of Mental Health, specialists in mental health, including specialists in grant programs. The other 2 were nominated by us, were very esteemed senior veterans who also had experience with grant money but understood the veteran community. So those 5 people independently scored every single package. There were over 40 packages. They scored them. Their scores were added up without their knowledge by an independent person, and those scores were presented to the State Board of Veterans Affairs. which had appointed a grant committee to do an initial review and make recommendations to the full State Board of Veterans Affairs. That process played out. It took several months because we wanted to be meticulous about it. And everybody congratulated us on the procedures, the scheme that we put together, and everything was fine. The State Board of Veterans Affairs made the final decisions. I didn't get a vote. I didn't take part in the deliberations. They looked at the scores and decided where the cutoff would be, and they eventually picked 33 grant recipients to get a maximum of $250,000. Again, not a lot of money, but for a small nonprofit, that can be.
Well, and a small nonprofit knows how to turn
exactly.
They know how to make the most out of money.
Now, the scoring was based on the proposal that the grant recipient submitted, which was an overall concept of how they were going to spend the money. Mm-hmm. And there have been some really erroneous criticism of that. The final document that was going to govern how they could spend the money would be a formal contract, which the Alabama Department of Mental Health was supposed to draft, which would go into effect. We had a deadline of the end of May to get those contracts in place. Everything was fine. First part of 2024, didn't hear any concerns. We were going to pay mental health. We transferred the $7 million to the Department of Mental Health for the distribution of the funds. No contracts were written. Heard no concerns. Our memorandum of agreement with mental health said if there were any concerns that the two commissioners were supposed to get together in good faith and work out those concerns. If that failed, go to a mediator to work it out. None of that happened. On April 2nd, I was handed a termination letter out of the blue saying we're pulling out of the agreement. I was like, this is going to kill the grant program. We're running out of time.
Yeah.
Had no idea that nothing had been done and that you had concerns. This is the first notice I had.
These groups have already been approved.
Yes.
They're moving forward.
We had publicly announced the grant recipients. Yeah. Many of them had made plans based on this. So I went into, frankly, a little bit of panic mode, and I went into rescue mode. So I said, okay, we got to have someone else to assist us. So we partnered with Troy University, who's been magnificent. They immediately jumped into action. Chancellor Jack Hawkins, talked to him, he agreed. They helped us immensely. They have a grant office. We're going to pay them now to do all of this. They agreed, and that process has been taking place ever since then. But the other problem was, I said, if we lose that federal grant money, I can't go back to the grant recipients and say, sorry, we lied, you're not going to get the money.
No.
So I jumped through hoops immediately. I went to the legislature and to the State Board of Veterans Affairs in quick succession and got permission to just take $7 million out of our operational funds instead of the federal grant money, because that's the right thing to do. Yeah. And I got those approvals. So we had a path forward. I did not know that mental health had forwarded concerns to the finance department. So the finance department told us, cease and desist any work on the grants. You can't even talk to the grant recipients until we've looked into this matter and make sure everything's okay. Well, they looked at it. May 21st, I get a call from the finance director saying, sorry, it took us a while to look into this. We've been busy. We looked at the program. We couldn't find any conflicts of interest. Verbatim. Had witnesses to that conversation. Your procedures were good. You know, problem is we're running out of time. It's May 21st. We've got until the end of May. There's no contracts written. And the rules are very complicated. You've got an alternative plan. I congratulate you on jumping through the hoops and coming up with an alternate plan. That's the way we need to go. And I said, great. That's the way we're going to go. Everything was fine. We were moving forward. Troy started helping us draft contracts, negotiating with the grant recipients, so we had a plan.
Let me take a break.
Yep.
We had a plan moving forward, and it gets dicier from here, is my understanding.
It does.
All right. Kent Davis with us, former commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. If you're interested in the well-being of veterans here in our state, this is a conversation that you definitely need to continue listening to hear how this has went down. All right. We'll take a break, and we'll be right back on the other side. And we welcome you back in Priority Talk Radio. Greg Davis here with you. And we continue our conversation with Rear Admiral Kent Davis, former commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. And he's laying to us out this whole process of grants and then the money not being provided. And who knows what all went on in here. It's politics, it's government, it's bureaucracy, it's agendas, it's I'm sure lobbyists. I mean, there's all kinds of things that go on. I'm around state government enough that I see enough of it to get some kind of understanding of it. And so you go ahead and just kind of pay the grants out of the budget that you have, which means that's other services you're not able to provide because of that.
Yeah, arguably.
Yeah, you have to. And so, you think it's a bad situation, but you think you've made the best of it.
Oh, yeah.
And survived it.
We had a path forward.
Yeah.
Everything was going according to plan.
And then tell me, I guess is the next thing here is some folks on the board or the commission, I guess.
State Board of Veterans Affairs.
State Board of Veterans Affairs.
Yeah.
Okay, get the wording right. Basically approach you with some concerns.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah. So I have to brief them on everything that's going on in the department. I do a monthly operational report when I was commissioner, so they knew what was going on, regular reports on all of this. They meet quarterly, so they had a quarterly meeting in July of 2024. It was down in Enterprise, Alabama, where we were building our new state veterans home. And before the meeting, a couple of the members came up to me and said, we have some serious ethics concerns with how this played out. I said, okay, hold it right there. Was a city manager. I know the ethics code pretty well. The state ethics code says, black and white, if an agency head is made aware of ethics concerns, they have an outright obligation to report those concerns to the Ethics Commission for investigation. If that agency head fails to report ethics concerns that are brought to his or her attention, they're guilty of a Class A misdemeanor crime for failure to report. I told them that.
Well, that's a cover-up if somebody tells you and
right.
you don't. Yeah.
I said, do you understand that? And I said, need to bring the vice chair. The chair does not participate. The governor does not participate in the meeting. So the vice chair is the presiding officer. So I said, we need to bring the vice chair into this conversation. Brought the vice chair, Scott Gedling, in. So three of us are talking. They laid out their basic concerns, mentioned facts, witnesses, and I said, okay, I'm not sure this qualifies, but I'm now obligated to report it. It's up to the Ethics Commission to look into it. Do you understand that? Yes. I said, I'm going to talk to some of the people you've mentioned, gather some more facts, write something up, get you to review it. Everybody agreed to that. So wrote something up, shared it with those three people, asked them, does this encapsulate the concerns you brought to my attention? Yes. Got submitted to the Ethics Commission. Somewhere along the way, someone leaked that complaint, and it got to the press. I got to tell you, I was pretty furious, and I called the Ethics Commission to complain about that, talked to them for a while, talked to one of their attorneys, and I eventually said, look, I think this has compromised the whole issue. I went back to the original three complainants that had come to me, and I said, my recommendation is I just withdraw the entire complaint because I think it's been compromised. Along the way, I found out some other facts. I corrected a couple of things in the original narrative. Didn't hear a lot back from the Ethics Commission.
Well, do you think it was leaked from the Ethics Department?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, and I don't want to speculate.
Whoever leaked it knew.
I think there should be an investigation.
They knew
of how it got
information
leaked.
that they would only know if they had seen the report or seen the complaint.
Yeah, I know one news outlet that got it told me they got a copy of my original narrative. Now, they did not get the whole file, so they didn't see the whole series of facts. They only saw the original narrative, which was only a piece of the file.
Okay.
And that's created some misnomers that have been reported in the press. I got to be honest. Well, I so badly wanted to say, well, you didn't see the whole file. Here's the whole file. But I didn't do that. I said, okay, I'm not going to play that game of leaking any further information. I think there was some gamesmanship going on in that, frankly. But I don't know who leaked it.
Okay.
I think it's infuriating. I think it's unethical and pretty despicable because it's supposed to be a secretive process. But I formally asked that it be withdrawn because I said it's been compromised. Now people know what's in that complaint. People are talking.
Yeah.
They can corroborate.
Get their story straight.
Exactly. Yeah. So withdraw it. Didn't hear anything. Didn't get an answer on whether it was going to be withdrawn. August 27th, get a letter from the Ethics Commission saying they've dismissed the complaint. They dismiss a lot of complaints. But in their letter, they said, we appreciate your understanding your obligation to report this to us. So I thought, okay, matter's all over. They looked at it. There was nothing there in the complaint. I said, look, I'm reluctant to even report this, but this is your job to look at it, see if there's any there. reported it to the board that it had been dismissed, and I thought, we're over and done with. So that was August 27th. September 5th, I'm driving down to Enterprise, Alabama to meet one last time with the contractor building our brand new state veterans home, because we had a grand opening ceremony on September 13th. Major event. About 11 a.m. in the morning, I get a call from our admin officer, emotionally upset, pretty much crying on the phone, and I said, what's wrong? And she said, you and I just got an email from a legal assistant in the governor's office. And I said, what does the email say? She said, well, first of all, it's immediately dismissing a board member, one of the people who had made the ethics concerns known to me. And they're asking for your resignation by 5 o'clock today, 6 hours later. And I said, well, I'm driving. I can't even pull up the letter.
Huh. Yeah.
What's this all about? And she said, well, there's just a generic concern in here that you mishandled federal ARPA grant money. I said, well, I thought that was all worked out. We had a path forward. We certainly didn't mishandle
Which was the money you didn't ever get, right?
It was never spent.
Never, yeah.
I mean, not a penny of it was spent. It was turned in back to finance, and we used state operational funds that had been appropriated to Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. And, as I explained, I had nothing to do with picking the grant recipients, scoring the grant recipients.
Yeah.
I specifically recused myself. The State Board of Veterans Affairs had purview over that. The Alabama Department of Mental Health was supposed to be the technical experts drafting contracts, so I was kind of stymied by all this. And I said, I've got like a 3-hour meeting coming up with our contractor to put together a punch list for the grand opening of this facility. There's no way I can respond and look at this and consider my options. You're asking me to end my almost 6-year tenure as commissioner, not knowing the facts.
Yeah.
Nobody had called me. Literally, I'm relayed an email from my admin officer that she happened to be copied on, and my head is spinning, thinking, I've landed on another planet with all these developments. Well, this was a week after the Ethics Commission dismissed my complaint that I'd filed. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out probably some retaliation going on there for that ethics complaint. Everybody's come to that conclusion. That's not me.
Yeah.
Everybody is telling me that. I've had elected officials, I won't betray their confidentiality, but I've had plenty of senior elected officials come up to me say, it's pretty obvious what's going on here. So I said, I can't even respond to this today. So I didn't. And apparently that made the governor's office mad. So the next day they issued, and by the way, they also released publicly the letter to the news media. So within about 5 minutes of my admin officer calling, the news media starts calling me. Phone ringing off the hook, and I had to say, I haven't seen the letter. I don't know much about this. I was just informed. I don't have a statement right now. That's all I could say at that point. I thought, it would have been nice and professional if someone called me, discussed this. And in military tradition, I probably would have said, I understand, I'll come over and talk to you. And I probably would have said, let's work something out. And we eventually did. So the next thing that happened was when I didn't resign by 5 o'clock that day, the governor called for a special called meeting of the State Board of Veterans Affairs to call for my removal for cause. So the Alabama Code says the commissioner is appointed by the State Board of Veterans Affairs and can only be removed by the board for cause. So I thought, well, okay, that meeting was supposed to take place on September 10th, and my phone kept ringing off the hook. And finally, a lot of phone calls from the governor's office, and state board members told me afterwards they were getting calls from the governor's office basically tallying up votes, saying, can we count on your support for the governor in this?
Whipping the vote.
Whipping the vote. Well, the problem is the State Board of Veterans Affairs is subject to the Open Meetings Act. Any substantive discussions are supposed to take place in public, in the sunshine. Governor's office is big on transparency. Well, these phone calls are being made without my knowledge. And on September 9th, I get a call from the vice chair saying, this is bad. He said, I think the only way I can resolve this is at that special called meeting. If you don't resign before the special called meeting, I'm going to take 3 votes. I'm going to call for 3 votes. I'm going to ask that the governor not even be there at the meeting she called. And the first vote is to affirm her decision to kick one of the members off the board. The second is we're going to take a vote on whether you did anything wrong in administering the ARPA grant funds, and that's probably not going to pass. But then we're going to take a vote that you've lost the trust and confidence of the governor and need to be removed as commissioner. I'm certain that I have enough votes to vote you out as commissioner. I said, all right, Scott Kettling, so it looks like I have no choice except to resign. So had a meeting with the governor's chief of staff and her legal counsel and my attorney, and the deal we worked out was I would quietly agree to resign effective December 31st. They would not badmouth me so I could get another job somewhere. I can move on with my career. But I said, look, I'm a retired military officer. I know sometimes there's no wrongdoing, but in the interest of harmony and everybody getting along, the best thing is just move on. And that's what we agreed to.
Yep.
We had a firm agreement.
December 31st.
December 31st, I was going to leave voluntarily.
And that was with the governor's assistant?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And I signed a memo saying I'll voluntarily resign effective December 31st quietly. We both issued statements. We'd worked out a deal amicably. Okay. The next thing that happens is the State Board of Veterans Affairs has their next quarterly meeting in October. And one of their committees went through the whole grant process for about an hour and a half, grilled me, asked questions. I'm obligated. They're my bosses. I answered every question. At the end, a motion was made that Commissioner did nothing wrong. I make a motion that we exonerate him completely. That motion passed unanimously. The next day, that motion vote was presented to the entire State Board of Veterans Affairs. They debated it. I didn't say anything. I didn't say one word in that whole discussion. At the end, one of the board members basically said, so I have a question. If he's been exonerated and he didn't do anything wrong, why is he resigning?
Yeah.
And we all agree he's done a great job as commissioner, so he made a motion. We asked the commissioner to rescind his resignation. I didn't make a comment. I didn't say anything. That passed unanimously. In fact, one of the members of the board said, we don't want him to say anything or answer today. We want him to consider this, go talk to his family, maybe talk to the governor's office. So they took the vote, unanimous, asking me to stay as commissioner. I called my attorney and said, what do I do now? And he said, well, let me talk to the governor's general counsel and let's have a talk. Don't do anything until close of business on October 18th. And I said, okay, I won't do anything until close of business until October 18th. I'll let the attorneys talk. The morning of October 18th, once again, an email from a junior person in the governor's office released to the news media. My phone starts ringing off the hook. Another call for a special called meeting to ask for my immediate removal as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs.
Yeah. Let's take a break right there.
Okay.
So the second email comes. That means there's going to be another board meeting.
Correct.
And we'll get you that on the other side as well. This is Rear Admiral Kent Davis, former commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, and you're starting to hear why we say former commissioner, because that's the story that's being told here today. All right, stay with us. We'll be right back. Greg Davis here, and we are back in continuing our conversation with Rear Admiral Kent Davis, former commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, recently fired by Governor Ivey and what she called, what was it, Supreme Executive Powers, which is, I don't think anyone's ever heard that term before. But so you've resigned. The board then says, hey, he's done nothing wrong. You had this agreement for the end of the year. That wasn't good enough. So the board comes back and votes again, right? The second time around. And two people, is that right?
Yeah, so what happened October 18th, the governor calls another special called meeting asking for my immediate removal as Commissioner of Veterans
Affairs.
December 31st. Instead of December 31st, which we'd agreed upon. So in that request, they said, usually the meetings are over in the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, but they said because the governor's calling this for her convenience, she gets to pick the date and time. It was on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. in the state capitol, so it's convenient for her right down the hall from her office. And everybody was like, okay, here we go again. Well, pretty short notice. The state board members live all over the state.
Yeah.
Many of them have jobs, so a lot of them were not able to come to the meeting on such short notice. Of the 17 members of the board under the Alabama code, some of the positions had just, their terms had expired on September 30th, and there hadn't been new appointments, so there were probably about 11 people left on the board. Some people said, I can't come, I had illness, my work won't allow me. some people abstained in the vote. After calling the meeting, the governor didn't show up at the meeting. And for the first time, I think, ever in the history of the board, she appointed a proxy to vote on her behalf, which is fine. I guess that's legal. Mm-hmm. And they would not allow virtual participation in the meeting. So those that had medical issues couldn't participate. You had to be physically present. In the end, when you add all that up, only 5 people voted out of the 17 slots on the board. 5 people, one of which was the governor's representative. I still won the vote.
Yeah.
The board still voted not to dismiss me immediately as commissioner, so that basically left in place. I was going to voluntarily resign December 31st, which was important because we had 2 major inspections from the federal government coming up. We were still opening our brand new state veterans homes. I had planned to transition and turnover and all that. Not easy just to walk out the door after 6 years.
No.
So it created a lot of headache for a lot of people. So the vote takes place. The board, once again, the 3rd vote in my favor, they say, no, we don't want him to leave immediately.
And so this was to leave immediately. You're still going to leave at the end of the year.
Correct.
That's still in place.
Absolutely.
And so even after that vote goes down, that's when she comes back and says, supreme powers.
Within moments after that meeting, they had a letter prepared saying, we don't care about the vote. The governor is invoking supreme executive power and removing you immediately.
Supreme executive powers.
Yep. Well, the story gets a little more interesting from there. So I thought, my attorney was there. I said, what do I do? And he said, well, you got to abide by it. So go get your personal effects from your office and go home. You're no longer commissioner for now, but we'll challenge this legally. I was headed to the office and got a call saying there are governor staffers and law enforcement, and they've alerted the news media. Probably not a good idea for you to come back to the office because they want to get you on camera being escorted out of the building. So I started to go home, and then I got a call from my wife saying there's law enforcement outside our house waiting for you. Basically, I was being treated like a common criminal.
Yeah.
For an administrative matter. I mean, amazing. You know, look, most people who know me know I'm pretty down to earth, but for God's sake, I served 31 years in uniform. I retired as an admiral, 5 combat zone deployments, recent cancer survivor, to be treated like a common criminal. I tell you, it was pretty humiliating. In front of my family and my neighbors as well. I live in a neighborhood, and it was pretty obvious what was going on. So I drove home. The law enforcement official that greeted me was very nice, happened to be a military veteran himself. That's all I'll say because I don't want to get him in trouble. He was very respectful, did his job as ordered. And that was pretty much it. And then I had to arrange under law enforcement escort to go back to my office and clear out my personal effects. And the sole reason law enforcement came to my house was to collect any government property that I may have on my immediate person, which was my government cell phone and keys to my office. That was it. So that couldn't wait until the next day, apparently. So well, I got to tell you, I've never been treated like this way before, and never any doubts about my character or performance, service to the country, or anything like that. And you heard the whole story about all along the way, meticulously went out of the way to make things by the book and to do things correctly and ethically.
Well, I want to carry, if you've got more time, I want to carry you over because I want to talk about some of the ramifications of this and where you're going from here. So if you guys will hang on, we'll go over the top of the hour, and we'll come back on the other side, another segment with Kent Davis, former commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, as he said, retired admiral from the Navy. All right, stay with us, and we'll come back and sort of go into some of the reasoning and where this goes from here. Obviously, you've got attorneys, and there's lots of room here for interpretation on if those powers were authorized or not. And so I want to talk more about that as well. All right, stay with us, and we'll be back another hour. And we welcome you back in for another hour of Priority Talk Radio here on Truth 101 WXJC. We are carrying over from last hour Rear Admiral Kent Davis. He's the former commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. And if you're just joining us for the new hour, I'm going to encourage you to go back on our video platforms. Easiest would be Facebook or other platforms, and watch the video of the last hour, or go to our podcast platforms, our audio platforms, and listen. The whole story is there. But we're going to try to wrap this up here during this segment. There's so many what ifs and questions I've got now that we've heard the complete story, from the source. Kent, so your last day, the day all that came down, when they humiliated you,
October 22nd.
treated you like a common criminal, October 22nd.
Yeah.
So obviously you've got attorneys. I'm sure you guys have you already are looking to file a lawsuit to try to make this right.
Yeah, I'm looking at all of my legal options, things from, did the governor really have the power to do this?
Because executive supreme powers, that's scary.
Supreme executive power.
Supreme
That is
executive
scary.
power. That's scary.
This is the United States,
that
not
sounds
North
like something
Korea.
we left behind in in England or something, over 250 years ago.
And look, I'm a former attorney, former federal attorney. I thought we had a tradition of protecting whistleblowers, protecting First Amendment rights, honoring the state ethics code. Yeah, I think there's more than a hint of retaliation here, and that's not me. So I've been contacted by law professors, watchdog organizations, attorneys wanting to help with this, former and current elected officials saying it's pretty obvious what's going on here, that this is retaliation. Do we really want an ethics system that discourages people from coming forward with concerns? This will have a chilling effect, because now, I will tell you, anybody is going to look at this situation and say, well, heck, I'm not filing an ethics complaint now. Somebody will come after me and ruin my career, ruin my reputation. I will tell you, there have been falsehoods put out that I've had to combat. Prime example, one of the news outlets down in Mobile published a story quoting a state legislator that I read, and I said, that's completely false. So I reached out to the paper and I said, can I rebut that? They reached out to the state legislator, and he said, well, I got that from the governor's office. And he went back and checked and said, yeah, that wasn't right. And he apologized to the reporter. And I thought, really? You're putting out blatant falsehoods. One of the falsehoods was that I had somehow personally selected the grant recipients, knowing that some of them were ineligible for receiving federal grant dollars. As I explained, I recused myself, didn't even look at the grant proposals, didn't score them, didn't vote on them. So completely false. That was just one of many that I've had to correct on the record. And I finally said, look, I'm still willing to go away quietly, but when you start doing that, I'm 61 years old. I have a reputation as a retired admiral. We have a due process in this country. I have a right to defend myself and my reputation. You're not going to do that to me. You're not going to put out falsehoods. So yeah, there may be some other legal action following up on this.
Well, I would certainly, I hope so, because the supreme executive powers thing, that needs to go before the courts.
It's a little scary.
That's not a thing that I've ever heard of.
Nobody is above the law in this country.
Yeah, that for no other reason, that can't be a precedent. That's not the way we operate. If you don't mind me asking, and the reason I brought you in to let you have a long form, you haven't sat down and done this yet, have you? Long form like this?
Not like this. I've answered some individual questions.
Yeah,
I did
so
go on one radio show that was pretty short.
We wanted to sort of put it all out there at one time to get the whole narrative in order.
Yeah, Greg, I'll say this. I'm a man of faith. I'm a devout churchgoer. I was in the Christian Legal Society and a firm believer in faith. And part of this is spiritual for me. It does hurt. God is good, but I do have a reputation as a spiritual person, as a person of faith, and I've got to defend that reputation.
Well, it hurts your testimony.
It does.
Yeah, your personal, your Christian testimony.
Absolutely.
Any of us can understand that. What do you think happened in there? There's so many different scenarios blowing in my mind of didn't like who got approved for the grants. What do you think happened? Or can you say? I don't know.
Yeah, some of it's speculation, and I don't like to speculate, but I think it's clear that whenever there's money involved, lobbyists are going to jump in, and I know that happened. There is a little bit of a monopolistic attitude in the state in some industries, and I think the attitude of even a relatively small pot of money, $7 million in government operations, to you and me, that's a lot of money. I could retire nicely with
Yeah.
that. But in government operations, that's not a huge pot of money. But even that amount, I think, caused consternation. I do also think that there was a personal spat between the Alabama Department of Mental Health and at least one of the potential grant recipients. I know that for a fact.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that I'm collateral damage in that spat. It happened to be the person who was removed from the State Board of Veterans Affairs. I mean, I don't even want to get into that because that's a collateral issue that's probably going to result in some more legal action. But I've learned some powerful lessons. I've always tried to be about performance, not politics. And I'm telling you, that formula doesn't always work in the state of Alabama. We do have a problem with politics in the state, and I can see why my fellow citizens get aggravated with politics and even politicians sometimes. And I think that probably affected the latest national elections because people get fed up and they do want real change and drain the swamp and get beyond politics.
Well,
I think all of that played in.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted this story to be told, because as I studied on it and read and had a short conversation with you, just for people to understand what goes down, the kind of stuff that can go down. Now, I want to clarify. You never had a personal meeting with the governor herself over this issue.
No.
She never attended one of the board meetings.
No, you've
had no face-to-face.
No.
Been in the same room with her.
In that long meeting with her chief of staff for an hour and a half and her general counsel, she opened the door for about 30 seconds, and the only comment she made to me was, "I hope we can work out a deal." That was it. And she closed the door and left. No substantive conversation with her. Now, I have no ill will towards the governor.
That does tell me that she was at least aware of it, because staffs can do things and run things. We've all seen that done at the White House level,
That was it.
And you wonder if the person in charge even really knows it's going on.
Yeah, it was about a 30-second
with everything going on in the news. Surely, that's not a case, but she obviously knew you were there and knew what you were there for.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd been summoned over there.
Yeah.
And I'd been told they really didn't want to have that special called meeting on September 10th because they were afraid it was not going to go well. Now, a few weeks later, the vote by the State Board of Veterans Affairs pretty much proved that when they took first at the committee level and then the full board unanimously voted to exonerate me and ask me to stay as commissioner. So she would have lost that vote on September 10th, and I think I was misled going into that vote. If I had known all the full facts,
probably wouldn't have.
I'm not sure I would have agreed to resign on December 31st. I think it was what we call fraud in the inducement a little bit going on. Now, Greg, I did want to say this. I am so grateful for the unanimous outpouring of support I've gotten, not only from veterans. Hundreds, if not thousands of veterans have reached out to me, but also citizens, lawyers, people from all over the country that have read this. It was in the Washington Examiner, a story, and people have been contacting me, people I don't know, saying, I'm kind of outraged over this, and this is kind of an indication maybe Alabama needs to step up their act on many levels, especially in taking care of veterans. Yeah, I've criticized Alabama sometimes saying, you look at other states, they're doing a lot more to help veterans. Platitudes, saying we want to be the most veteran-friendly state, and showing up for photo ops, that's fine. But if you don't follow it with substantive action, veterans very quickly see through that. And they're starting to see through that. And I will tell you, if anything, the last few weeks have been a galvanizing moment for veterans. I have seen more action and more unity and more outrage in the veteran community in the last few weeks than I've seen in the last 6 years. There are even people now urging me to run for office.
Yeah, I can see it. And I know this because you and I had been trying to schedule this for a couple of weeks for you to come in. You kept commitments to speak all over the state at Veterans Day and veterans events surrounding Veterans Day.
And I've gotten additional
that
invitations.
Were scheduled because you were the commissioner, and so you've went at your own time and expense to go and make good on those promises that you would be there on those days. So you're seeing a lot of veterans out at these events
all over the state. I've been everywhere from Vestavia Hills to Mobile in the last week, speaking and participating in events, and that's going to continue. The outpouring of support I've gotten, I've been amazed at, actually.
Yeah. Well, God bless you. And, there's always two sides to a story. So we've certainly heard your side. I don't guess that we'll probably hear the other side.
If you do, and if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
I mean, that's just the way it works. We won't hear the other side unless it comes out in court at some point or in depositions or something.
For weeks, I didn't say anything, but when there were some bits of misinformation, I said, enough. Mm-hmm. I'm going to start addressing what actually happened.
Yeah. Well, and you've had a quote out there, you're not going away, and you don't mean that in a vindictive way. You're going to continue to serve and support the causes that mean so much to you.
This ain't about me. And look, I'm fine. I'm retired from the military and the federal civil service. My bottom line is serving my brothers and sisters who also served in uniform. And I think anybody in the veteran community knows I'm sincere about that.
Yeah. Well, God bless you. And thank you for your time and for going into so much detail with us. I'm glad the story's been told now in one good, full place. I'm sure there's more. But I think we got a good lead on who you are, what you did, what went down, and sort of where things are now. And I think that's important to do. This is important. When you say, what, a third of our citizens here in the state?
About a quarter veterans or their family.
This affects a lot of people.
Yeah, it does.
It really does.
Yep.
And it needs to be run right, and veterans need to be served. There's nothing more important than that when it comes to government service. It's right there at the top.
Thanks,
Thank
Greg.
you,
God bless you.
Rear Admiral Kent Davis. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
All right.